You are listening to the Gritty Podcast, where we talk about all things gritty. All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I'm Brian Call, and today our guest is Danielle Prewett. And Danielle, we've got you started a vlog, Wild and Whole, years ago.
Yeah, a blog.
A blog.
It was a secret blog because I didn't want anybody to know about it because I thought it was cheesy, but it was just kind of this self project I was doing.
And now you, how many years ago was that?
Oh gosh, it was probably 8 years ago, maybe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. About the same time I started the Gritty Podcast, about 9 years ago.
Okay.
Somewhere back in there. So, and tell me a little bit about you now, what you're doing, what you're up to, a little bit of your background. So anyone in my audience who doesn't know much about you, just give them that little high level view. Who is Danielle Prewett?
Well, I like to say I have the best job in the world. I get to travel and hunt and teach people how to cook wild food, and really more so than that, connect to their food, because I think it's a really important thing that most people don't think about in today's society. And so I get this like really cool job where I get to travel around and do that. I work for a company called Meateater. And I just finished writing my first cookbook, which will be out in October. So I'm pretty excited about that. Right now, I live in San Antonio, outside of San Antonio. It's 1 billion freaking degrees. With my husband, 2 bird dogs. And so, yeah, we just kind of get to live this like really cool life. Guide what I say, guided by the seasons. Every season's got some sort of unique opportunity, and we're opportunistic hunters and fishermen, so we kind of just sort of live life that way, kind of rolling with the punches there.
Have you always been into cooking and that kind of thing, or even just the outdoors?
No, I would say most of it all started when I met my husband. When I was younger, I'll caveat all that to say, when I was younger, we lived out in the country in a really small town in Texas, and we had like every animal, every critter. We had a small emu farm, like a hobby emu farm. This was the 90s. I don't know if you remember the 90s emu phase, but like, yes. Yeah. I mean, I thought it was totally normal to be eating emu burgers and omelets from emu eggs, which are enormous. And so we had guinea hens and chickens and a duck, goose. We had like one cow that was really like a pet, really. So like I kind of had that upbringing of like knowing that like a variety of animals were food and not just beef, chicken, and pork. But I would say like, my dad's from South Dakota, and we grew up every Thanksgiving going to the farm where he grew up, and the boys would go pheasant hunting, and I would just kind of hang back with my grandma and make fried pheasant, and just kind of be in the kitchen a little bit. But it really didn't take off for me until I met my husband, who's a very avid outdoorsman.
So what was the first hunt you went on where you actually took an animal? All right, folks, quick interruption, quick announcement. We have movies coming your way in November, December, and January. A whole new batch of gritty films coming your way. They're about an hour each, long form. Check us out. But to watch them, you got to go to the Gritty Films YouTube channel and subscribe there. We have a channel we have dedicated to just hunt films. Just type in Gritty Films, find us, click the subscribe button, follow along, look for the new drops in November. Can't wait to show it all to you. It's going to be awesome. Now let's get back to the show. So what was the first hunt you went on where you actually took an animal?
I don't know if this is really good. Well, it counts. Dove hunting. I'm from Texas, so it's like that is the like initiation. I say dove shooting. It's not really hunting. I'm pretty sure we were in college and you know, you're just kind of standing around. We were at a ranch and there was a pool nearby and like drinking beer.
Yeah.
After the hunt, like it wasn't exactly a hunt. But that was the first time that was when I was started shooting guns. And it was just easy and fun, like an easy introduction, dove hunting. But actual hunting was when we moved to North Dakota. That's when I actually started hunting.
So big game, moving on to big game. Was it difficult for you, the first animal you took? What was that experience like?
Kind of, I'm my brain is wired to need to understand and like I don't know how to explain this. My brain is wired to need to like fully understand things and to fully like just grasp everything I'm doing and how to do it. Like I like to be super educated on stuff.
Yeah.
So when it came to big game hunting, I felt very intimidated. Up to that point, we did a lot of upland bird hunting.
Mm-hmm.
We have 2 bird dogs. And so I spent probably several years just bird hunting. And I loved cooking wild game. I loved butchering. And I knew how to break down and process a whole deer before I ever shot one. And so, like, for me, I had to like take these steps for myself in order to feel comfortable shooting a deer. Just because I think the last thing I wanted to do was wound the animal, lose it, take a gut shot, all those things, because it was so important to me. And then, just the weight of it all emotionally, like it took me a long time to decide to start shooting big game animals just because I don't know, I put probably a very unnecessary amount of pressure on myself too. I had started working for Meateater at the time. And so it was just kind of, yeah, I don't know, one of those things that I just kind of built up pressure over the years.
So, were you being filmed at the time?
No, I asked not to be filmed.
That
Just
add a little more pressure to the whole thing too.
Well, I think pressure, but I think more importantly, I noticed going from hunting as purely something that you just love doing as a hobby to doing it for a business, for work and social media and everything that entails are very different experiences when you're out in the field and you're like constantly on your phone. And so I really wanted to feel more immersed in the actual experience and not feel like I have to capture content.
Yeah. Yeah. I know for me, over the years, I grew up hunting since I was just a little kid, since I was following my dad around long before I could hunt. He would bow hunt and I would walk the Oregon coast with him and we would look for deer and elk. And I had a bow and arrow by the time I was old enough to pull one back, little toy ones. And as I got older, I was hunting, got my hunter safety, and my dad was a big bow hunter. And that's mostly what we did is go to archery tournaments and bow hunt. And I saw him shoot. Like I never saw the actual animal die. I'd see him go, and then he'd bring back the animal, a doe or something in the back of the truck, or that he shot with a bow. And but I recalling the first animal I ever shot, it was definitely I didn't expect. I was so excited to be a hunter and to get out and hunt that when I shot my first animal with a bow and it died and I saw it die, it was kind of surprising. It was a little intense to take a life,
Yeah.
And I was still pretty young then. And I was excited about being able to have taken an animal, it's something I worked for and wanted to do. And we ate it. And we were always, avid meat eaters, and hunters. But it still surprised me the emotions that I felt, not necessarily guilt, but just some sense of loss that this animal had died. then we made jerky and pepperoni sticks and we did things with it. And it sort of made that whole thing less, it seemed more purposeful, I guess.
Yeah.
And it was like cathartic in a way. It sort of, and to this day, when I go out on hunts, some animals I pursue, I might spend a lot of time trying to find this one animal in a certain area, excuse me, that I'm pursuing for a while. And I'll maybe have watched him for a couple of years even. And then I finally take that buck or elk or something, and I still feel like a little loss at taking the life. But the moment I start breaking it down and I load it in my pack and I start to pack it out, like there's like this change where it's sort of, I guess relieves that sort of sense of loss that I feel. And it's an essential part of the hunting process. Mm-hmm. And then this year, I went out to northern Canada and I hunted wolves. Well, I don't eat wolf. And it was an interesting experience because here I am hunting an animal, but I don't eat it.
Yeah.
And the justification for that, trying to, like you mentioned, trying to understand why you do something, I started to have to ask myself a lot of questions about it. And it was a lot harder to get at doing it versus an animal that I would consume.
Yeah, I've been in that situation. We were at our family's ranch and we were having coyote problems, and I don't know what exactly we were doing. I think we were hog hunting. We were we were hog hunting. So I had my rifle, and then my husband's like, "Oh, shoot that coyote. Shoot that coyote." And I was like, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I had a really hard time, and I don't have a problem with him shooting one. I just you should see this closet behind me. He used to do a ton of trapping, and I've got like a bajillion coyote pelts behind that door. But yeah, and I think it's because I knew that I wasn't going to eat it, and so it just felt hard to just take a life and then leave it there and say goodbye in a weird way.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same way. I've had to, I've thought about it a lot, and I have my I guess my understanding of what and why I do it. And they're not all the most altruistic motives, being, some are. There's definitely a place for trapping and for hunting wolves especially. But it's definitely harder to explain, like to those that don't do it. It's hard. This year, I was out with my friend Ryan Lampers. He does Hunt Harvest Health and Stealthy Hunter with his wife Hillary, and they, Ryan and I have been hunting for years, and we shoot a couple of wolves, and we went out on this big frozen lake, and we were up north really far. We went up and we took a couple of wolves, and we walk out on the lake, and we've taken some wolves in Montana and Idaho, but the wolves that we took up there were a whole nother class of size, the jaws, the body, the weight of it. When I saw those wolves, I thought to myself, these wolves are like werewolves. I mean, these are the ones that I always wonder when I saw these. How does this take down a moose or a buffalo? These wolves we shot in Idaho and Montana. Well, when I saw the wolves up north, I'm like, oh, that's how. They're giant.
They're big.
They're giant, and they see the jaws, and then you think, man, I don't want to be on the receiving end of that. We're riding snowmobiles through the snow, and it's like 10 degrees, and I'm like, man, if a pack of 20 of these came after you, or 10 or whatever, and you're a moose, yeah, I mean,
they're powerful.
Yeah, so much more respect for that than I did in the beginning. Now, I wanted to ask you a question as I was reading through some stuff you had written. You talk about conscious eating,
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean? Can you define that? Kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think for me, this is a term that I started using in lieu of eating sustainably because I think today that is like a really muddy terminology that people just kind of use as a blanket surface. And what I found was that people who wanted to eat sustainably were really taking advice largely driven by highly contrast news, either like eat meat, don't eat meat, and not going to get into that agenda. But what I discovered was that whatever side you fell on, there was this not misunderstanding, but this gap in that people were not intimately connected with the food that they were eating, and they didn't have a reason for why they made that choice from a personal standpoint. So when I say eating consciously, I it's about actually getting out, going out, finding the story and learning where your food comes from. And that was something that I started years ago wanting to eat sustainably. I was really into yoga. I was considering being a vegetarian.
Yeah.
You had read Michael Pollan's Omnivore Dilemma, and I was like, I don't want to eat factory farmed meat. What's the most sustainable way to live? And I was like, well, we already hunt, so let's just explore that idea. And what I discovered is that being more intimately connected to the food, particularly through hunting, but I don't think hunting is the only way. I began to discover so much more to it and became very passionate about the landscape and the habitats and native plants and all the other aspects to our agricultural industry and the human footprint that affect our wildlife, because I appreciate, particularly like with bird hunting, I appreciate that habitat and that these wild places so much, that I want to protect it and conserve it. And so that's kind of where like I went down this rabbit hole of like, what does it mean to really eat consciously? And what does it mean to know where the stories behind where your food comes from? And I think the more that people began to sort of think that way about their food, the better and more informed their choices will be. Because I think a lot of times people just make decisions based on something they saw, read, heard on social media, and they're not really finding the answer for themselves.
Mm. Yeah, years ago, I might have been Steve on a podcast with Rogan, and Joe Rogan. He was talking about how people are disconnected from the food they eat, and he said it gets real weird when everyone is consuming food that is brought to them in trucks into big cities, and they have no idea really, that chicken or that beef or that pork was a living thing. Is just completely disconnected from the reality of life and death, and that life eats life, and that people can get real strange when they never experience like what it is. They never have that, I guess, conscious eating where they're like, okay, this pizza, I know it's pizza, but the meat on this pizza came from, this living animal. These plants grew here for this pizza. Like there's a real serious disconnect. And I experience it when I share a hunt on my YouTube channel, make a film about Alaska or something, and people will watch it and then they'll say, I just don't understand how you can hunt while at the same time they're eating hamburgers and beef and meals every day that where animals were consumed.
Yeah. I was raising chickens for a while, and I had some neighbors that were disgruntled, and so I decided to dispatch them and eat them. And I posted about it on social media, just saying that I was like grateful. I mean, they were originally egg layers, but I bought a dual purpose breed. So in the event that I did need to eat them, they would have a little meat on their bones. So I made a post saying like, I'm grateful for like my experience with hunting because I know exactly what to do with this chicken. I know how to take the feathers off. I know how to gut it. I know how to do everything. Although it was very strange killing the chicken without a gun. I was like, oh shit. It's like that was an unexpected sadness killing chicken that I had been raising.
That's like close combat. That's a lot different than
I've cleaned a lot. I've shot and killed a lot of birds, but this one felt different just because they were, I was taking care of them for a long time. Anyway, but I was really surprised by the amount of people who were kind of horrified that I ate my chicken. And so, I mean, I guess that dabbles into like a whole different territory of like, are chickens pets? I mean, it's it's like, well, what do you get the chicken for? I mean, is it really your support animal here, or are we?
But people love their chickens, that's for sure. We have a chicken castle in our backyard that my dad built, and it's the most glorified chicken coop you've ever seen. I mean, it's fancier than our garage and our sheds and stuff. My sisters have been. I'm the oldest of 8 kids, and I have some siblings that are way into their chickens. They've had peacocks. You talk about emus, ostrich. Like they've had the bird thing and the chickens, and all of it is. I grew up with it my whole life.
Yeah.
People love their birds. I heard Shane Mahoney say this a few times. He's like, we as hunters can get upset by the disconnect. Like these people who get angry that you killed your chickens and ate them. But, on the upside, they care about animals. They don't like to see them die. They don't like to see that be the end. And so I think that we all can actually relate to that. I don't disagree with that sentiment. I think there's a kind of softness, though, in society because you do have to kill to survive. That's part of human existence, and I think that's really hard for people who actually don't have to come face to face with it very often or think about it. They just don't even think about it.
Yeah.
And what you've done is say, here's this chicken. I know how to do this. This is the purpose it served. And now they're like, you brought them face to face with the reality that they kind of have tucked away in the corner of their mind that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think just as humans in general, like we all have a footprint and we're all responsible in some way for the impact we have. And it's basically just and encouraging people to just take responsibility, I guess, for what they consume and to think about, that impact of what we have. And again, that's like, it sounds so much like just eating sustainably, but it's really more of asking you to be more in tune with the actual earth and what we're living on, where everything that's required to sustain wildlife is so important, because when you do take the time to look at that and dive into it, you begin to appreciate it more. Which that's a whole other thing that I love to talk about is from a hunting perspective, is the amount of gratitude you have for animals after you start hunting that I don't think you have before when you just go to the grocery store and you buy meat. It's so easy. You didn't have to kill it. You didn't have to clean it. You don't have to do anything but cook it. You really begin to appreciate things a whole lot more, and you see things just differently through a more clear lens.
Hey, if you like our show and you want to support us, head over to Peaks Equipment and check out what they have. Use the code GRITTY over there and you will save. They've got the trekking poles. Peaks has a teepee, they have gaiters, they have a headlamp, all premium products for the outdoorsman. Head over there, use the code GRITTY. That's peaksequipment.com. Now let's get back to the show.
Yeah. Years ago, I remember hearing Joe Rogan say, you know, this elk was not killed by a supermarket hitman.
Yeah.
You know, like I did it myself. I know where it comes from, and there's a certain, you know, consciousness of where that food comes from that I'm aware of. And I think you're right. There's an appreciation for that. You know, I heard Ranella say years ago, you know, he's like, I may not care more about this one antelope that's, you know, that you're upset that I killed, but I can almost guarantee I care more about antelope as a species and have done more to support their habitat, their longevity, their existence than you have. You know, in a debate he kind of had in this setting. I remember hearing that and I thought, yeah, that's one of the things with hunters is like, I want all the elk on the landscape. I want all the deer on the landscape and the bear and all that. I also want to hunt them.
Mm-hmm.
I want to bring that home. I want to experience the outdoors. I want to be in the pursuit of an animal in a way it makes me feel as close to that animal as anything I could try to do.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something I think in your DNA that just is turned on when you're in that stalk, you're hunting, you're in pursuit, you're studying, like which way the wind blows matters more. The wind, you know, the tracks on the ground, the silence that you're engulfed in, the focus you're on in that moment with a bow and arrow slipping through the trees. Like there is something different about that pursuit of an animal than just looking at it from a distance through some binoculars. That the hunt fires something in the human soul, I think, that no other activity can.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's like you care about the animal and their existence and their future. And if I had to give up hunting in order to ensure that those animals stayed on, you know, intact, I would do it. But it's ironic because it seems that hunting is the very thing that has enabled the populations to expand and grow. You know, the conservation model seems to be the thing that has actually made wildlife more abundant, not less.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a primal feeling that you get. And I think, you know, I think there's something important about the act of actually being the one to take the animal's life that teaches some really valuable lessons. But I mean, there's so many times that my husband's a bow hunter. There's so many times that I just want to hunt with him. I don't want to shoot anything. I don't need to carry anything. Because I still love being out there. And you know, I think one of my favorite stories, when I was learning to hunt, we were in North Dakota and the weather's just it's cold, always like 30, 40 mile an hour wind, you know, below 20s, snot frozen on my face. And I remember we had been pushing this little creek, for a long ways, and we've just been kind of waiting to get it to the end because the birds were just running through it. And so once we got to the end, we knew the birds were going to fly out. As we did this annoying long walk, knee deep snow, and we get to the end and it's my turn to shoot and I miss. And I'm like, I did all that just to miss. And I was just like, I just started getting mad. And my husband stopped and turned to me and said, if you think hunting is about killing, you're doing it wrong. And I had to really stop and reevaluate. Okay, let's put the gun down. Why am I going hunting? What am I doing this for? Yes, I do want meat. And yes, there's a sense of gratification that comes from it and appreciation. But what is it that I'm doing this for? What is it that I care about? And it really changed my perspective. And so every time I do go hunting, not every time. I try to remember every time I go hunting, sort of that little lesson about, the purpose and why we do this and why we love it. If you shoot something, great. If you don't, that's also okay.
Yeah.
And that's really important for a lot of hunters who to just feel, well, I say that for a lot of female hunters. I don't know how many female audience members you have. I think a lot of women get have these certain expectations set upon them of what type of buck they're getting, how big is their buck, and to just sort of be like, I want just enjoy this,
Yeah.
set the expectations aside. But
Yeah.
yeah, hunting, whether you kill something or not, hunting definitely draws you so much closer to the earth, and just makes you feel more connected to the landscape.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit more about your cookbook here in a minute, but before I do that, I'm curious how you got into the Meateater. Like, how'd you fall under that umbrella? How did that come to be?
I met Steve. I was doing a cooking seminar at Pheasant Fest one year in South Dakota, and Steve was there, and somebody connected us. And I went to a breakfast with him, Yanni, and Doug Duran.
Mm-hmm.
And this was before Meateater became Meateater Inc. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
there
Yep.
was once a time before it was
Yeah.
Meateater Steve. Um, And so he was like, we're expanding, we're building a brand. We'd love to have you on board. And I was like, all in. And that was I think 7 years ago.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been with Meateater kind of since the very beginning. Meateater Inc.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
That's
don't know.
really cool. I I was watching Ranella's Meateater since season one when they first came out, and I tell my buddies, you got to watch this, and but it was on TV and most of them didn't watch TV. And it's like for years I was watching Meateater. I read all of Steve's books. Then they went to Netflix and all my friends were like, "Hey, have you seen this Meateater?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've been watching it for years, And
Yeah.
it's like all of a sudden, when it was on Netflix, it seemed like everybody knew, and it seemed to blow
Yeah.
up right shortly after that and just get massive recognition, which it deserved. I loved Meateater from day one. Um, I especially really love the first like 5, 6 seasons. I go back and watch because I'm nostalgic for that time when I first came on because there wasn't a lot like it
Mm-hmm.
in the hunting space where Steve had connected the food part to
Yeah.
and the cooking, sort of that part of it to the hunting in a way that shamefully I just feel like hunters hadn't done. They hadn't
Yeah.
told their story well for a long time.
Yeah.
And Steve really did an excellent job with that and completely helped, I think, mold the way modern society sees hunting today, from
Mhm.
his time meeting with more mainstream folks like Tim Ferriss, going on his caribou hunt with and doing some hunts with Joe Rogan, and then really getting on that mainstream stage and really opening the doors to the public to say, okay, hunting has a place. It
Mhm.
does make sense in the modern era. And
Yeah.
so I feel like what a great legacy and what a great company to work for. I'm a
Mhm.
huge fan of what Meateater has done over the years.
Yeah.
So and here you are working on this new book, and
Mhm.
again, here we are in this cooking wild game, kind of space. Um, what about the cookbook is your favorite aspect?
My favorite aspect is it's not just about meat and wild game. It's about everything else on the plate.
Oh,
Because I think everything else matters. It's, hunting and wild game is really a huge part of my life, but I eat vegetables too. And so I think about the same thing, like where am I getting my vegetables? How are they grown? I love to garden. Not always successful, but I love doing it, and I appreciate the local farmers nearby who do a much better job at it than I am. But and so yeah, so what's cool about the book is, for one, it's not organized by animals, it's organized by the seasons. So depending on, maybe you only hunt one species, or maybe you're an opportunistic hunter like I am, depending on whatever season you're in, if you open up the spring chapter, I wanted the reader to feel really excited about everything happening in spring. Turkeys, obviously. Like the big, yeah. I wanted people to get really excited about what's happening at that point of time in the year. Because that's kind of the way that I've always lived my life, is my lifestyle is just sort of immersed into like the changing of the landscape over the years. Like, I'm fascinated with native plants. I'm a big nerd. But watching the landscape change and the weather patterns and how that affects animals and the seasonality, to me, is just fascinating. And it's just like one other element that sort of draws me in to the outdoors via food. And so, yeah, you're going to open up spring and you're going to see turkey and morels. Here in Texas, we get a lot of heavy rains, and they always seem to fill up the creeks and ravines and push hogs out into the open pastures. And all of a sudden, everybody I know who has cattle ranches or farmland, they're getting run by hogs. And it's like that for me, it's like hog season. And they're always delicious. And then in summer, we spend a lot of time out on the coast fishing. And so it's kind of like a change of gears. And then obviously fall is just sort of like what's not happening in fall with regards to big game hunting, upland hunting. It's just kind of so anyway, so that's kind of how the book is organized, is sort of capturing the elements of each season and eating through that way. So you'll find recipes for wild game, but you're also going to find like other things to eat with it. It's cool. It's a more
holistic,
like well-rounded cookbook. It's not just about the meat.
Interesting. So I know this might sound a little crazy, and for foodies, this could really disturb, real cook type people. So 7 months ago, I started this carnivore diet. So I only eat meat. So I wanted to try this thing. So Ryan Lampers, he's been him and his wife have been growing vegetables and gardens forever. And he's really good too. Well, he starts this carnivore thing. I'm like, how can you start this carnivore thing? You grow gardens and you're like the farmer, He's like, well, Brian, I've been reading it. My wife's a doctor. She's brought up some points, some new research. Just check this out. So he's been doing it he's almost 9 months of only eating meat.
Oh my gosh.
And I am now, I'm going on 7 months of just eating meat. So at first I was like, this is insane. I'll do it for a month or two just to see what happens. So, but now my audience is quite aware that I've been doing this carnivore diet. We talk about it maybe once every couple of weeks on the podcast, just giving people updates on how it's going and what's going on. And there's plenty of people who think I'm crazy, and then plenty who are like, this has been amazing. So I'm still on the fence. I'm like, hey, I'll try it and I'll see. I'm getting blood work done in a couple of weeks. But so far, the results have been pretty incredible where, I'm 50 years old. I had a lot of soreness and a lot of like brain fog and things like that. And as time has gone by, and I've only been eating, like, I'll have eggs and bacon and beef and moose and elk and deer and stuff like that. And no vegetables, no sugar, no processed foods, nothing else, just meat. And I feel incredible. So
what about
I have fish too.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. If it's an animal product, I'll eat it.
Okay.
I kind of stay off of, I don't do a ton of dairy, but I still have a little bit of dairy, like hard cheeses and, high fat dairy. I'll put a little bit of that in. But mostly it's eggs, bacon, and fatty meat. I really do well on like just beef. Pork and chicken, I don't feel as good on. I still have it, but I really like that sort of grass-fed meat. So from that perspective, I have a lot of wild game meat that I used to eat a lot of lean game meat. And I didn't, and then a lot of vegetables. So I was sort of paleo for, I don't know, a decade, do a lot of CrossFit, and I really went to that hunter-gatherer kind of eating. So I was eating a lot of whole foods, sweet potatoes, and not a ton of grain, mostly vegetables. If I was going to get carbs, it was usually through a sweet potato or something like that, squash. And then I'd have berries and some fruit and stuff. And it was very whole foods for a long time, for about a decade. So I didn't feel like a tremendous need to try this carnivore thing. But I did it anyway. And I felt incredible. It's even better. And so I have some, it's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down. But really what I wanted to ask you today was, so I have all this moose, elk, deer, and it's not very high fat. And and on that carnivore, as much as I'm eating meat, it's a lot of fatty meat. It's a lot of animal fat. I'd say 40% of what I eat is probably fat in the form of, a ribeye or a New York strip or, butter, eggs, bacon, some pork belly. I'll do brisket. It's pretty high fat meats. And about 40% of what I eat is probably fat and the other half is the meat. Or maybe even half and half. So my question is, what are like 2 or 3 of your sort of recipes where I could grab the fat, like my beef, I have beef fat scrap, and I'm like, to get the fat content up on the moose to where it's sustaining me because it's too lean.
Right.
What are some things like sausages or like what do you got in mind, or ground, but other than just ground meat?
I only ate wild game, or not only ate wild game. The only protein source for almost 10 years was wild game for us. I kind of stopped buying meat from a grocery store. It started as sort of like a project thing and like a experiment, and just became like this way of living that I just fell in love with, that I had a hard time buying meat again. Up until probably the last year or so. But I noticed the same issues because, as you probably already know, fat on the outside of the deer can be so highly saturated that it's going to taste like wax.
Yes.
Fat on the inside near the kidneys and the caul fat is a lot less fatty, and that can definitely be utilized. But you're still getting something incredibly lean. And so I always, today now, I always have beef tallow is my favorite cooking medium for any red meat. So like anytime you're just like, say I'm going to eat a steak, You can do that. You can, instead of adding just plain butter on the top of a steak, you can sort of make an emulsification of um, adding beef tallow to the butter to make it more saturated. You can add beef bone marrow to it to make it more saturated. The tongue is surprisingly a really fatty cut of meat, so I always eat the tongue out of all my wild game animals. It's still not nearly as fatty as a beef or bison tongue. But beef and bison tongue are just amazing. There's a lot of fat in it. So those are the kind of things that I'll do to add fat in a really simple way. Is obviously
I
with
like that. Because we do a lot of on YouTube. There's this gal. It's called, her YouTube channel is the Steak and Butter Gal, and she puts a lot of butter. She uses a lot of butter but I do that too. Like with moose, I'll have a lot of butter, like a cube of butter, to go with the moose. But I wanted to try to, because I don't know, like the brain fog and sort of some of the issues I was experiencing. I'm like, is it because I just wasn't getting enough animal fats? Your brain's like 99% cholesterol. And we have a few carnivore doctors and MDs that are going to be on the show that are kind of, have been on Rogan's podcast, and others that have been around a minute, that have been doing this carnivore thing for 7 years, some a decade. And really the reason I was interested in it, it piqued my interest, was strictly because of focus, concentration, and brain fog. I was just feeling like real fuzzy thoughts, and I'd forget things where I set my keys down. I'm like, dude, I feel like an old man. Like, I don't like this. And so as I went to the carnivore thing, and Ryan's like, Brian, same thing for me, but man, my mind is so much sharper. Well, I wondered, is it the lack of, what is it that's helping? Is it just the vast increase in animal fats now? Because I was eating pretty lean. I was eating vegetables, and I was eating all my wild game. Like you, I wasn't shopping at the store for any domestic animals, and it was all wild game. And I just wonder, maybe I went too lean, or, are vegetables not as ideal as I thought they were? I'm still kind of experimenting with all of that. But at the end of the day, I definitely believe that I feel really good on this massive intake of animal fats.
Yeah. And then, the last thing I was going to say is obviously making sausage. I like to add pork fat back, because it's more of a neutral flavor, but you could also add beef tallow.
Pork
and
fat back.
Include liver. So I'm pregnant
Really?
right now. I'm off about 9 months.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I took like a massive deep dive in nutrition during pregnancy, because it's really surprising what modern medicine advises.
Yes.
Well, everybody, the population in general. I just really go against the grain for a lot of their recommendations. I particularly when it comes to processed food, sugar, and seed oils, I don't really subscribe to that kind of stuff. But there was this great nutritionist who wrote some in-depth books on nutrition for pregnancy, and fat is a really important one, especially getting choline, a lot of egg yolks, for brain health, for like baby's development. So I know you're not, I don't know if would be considered carnivore, but man, I would make a lot of custards, just egg yolks.
It is. Yeah.
Full fat cream. Although I don't know if you can have any.
I think they call that, there's a few recipes, they call it carnivore ice cream.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's basically custard. But I haven't tried any of that, but I wonder, I should try it.
It's, I mean, obviously depending on how much sugar you put in and what type of sugar, but Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of funny that you mentioned that about fat, because as I was kind of going throughout this pregnancy, I started, obviously getting really fatigued and being like, am I getting enough protein? Am I getting enough fat? And like kind of like questioning the diet that I've had up until this point, and in eating, there's only so much meat my body can handle that it just doesn't want to digest anymore. But I've noticed like adding liver. I started adding liver to my ground meat, eating more organ meats, and more fat. I eat a lot of avocado and coconut, and olive oil and salmon. So anyway,
those are all, like, if I do anything down the road, I'm still going to monitor what's happening. Sometimes when you do just an elimination diet, like is what I've done, I don't know if it's the actual diet or the absence of something else that I was eating before that's making me feel better, right? Is it the addition, or is it the removal of something, or both? But I like the idea of trying out the custard. And I do think that if I do anything, I'll probably add some fruits back in, including like avocado, berries. Some of the doctors, they talk about, the evolution of human beings and men, and that, sort of the foods that we consume, like sort of a primal man isn't necessarily going to walk up and grab a fistful full of kale and just eat it, or broccoli. It's not typically, it doesn't have the taste. It's almost like it's this signaling you like, hey, maybe this isn't the best thing for you to consume. But you walk by, no caveman is going to leave a banana or a strawberry or a berry on a bush. Like, you're going to eat that. It's that vegetable or that plant has actually grown to encourage you to eat it, to pass the seeds on and so forth. Whereas a lot of the plants have grown with oxalates and other things to dissuade your gut and your body from eating it. And so
are you a subscriber to Dave Asprey's hatred for kale?
Pretty much, yes.
I can't help. I think this is the foodie in me. I see food a little bit differently in terms of vegetables. I love them so much because they all offer a different texture and a flavor that I find useful in cooking, because I like things to be extremely exciting on a plate and colorful. Yes. I mean, I totally, there's been so many times I'm like, maybe I should stop eating kale, but I like it. So I just say, there's worse things to eat than kale.
Yeah. Well, and I think that what happens too is, like, I've mentioned this to a few friends of mine. Some are wild game chefs, and they're like, Brian, life's too short to not experience all these wines and all these other types of, vegetables and meals and cakes and pies and custards and ice creams. And, look, I'm 50. I have had that a whole lifetime of that. Right now, I'm trying to still latch onto the fountain of youth and, tap into that. And as much as I miss some of those, sweet desserts and things, I'm okay with giving it up. I've experienced it. I've spent a whole lifetime with that. And I've really found a whole new area of meat cooking and experimenting with fats and animal fats and meats that I found really enjoyable. I've never cooked so much on a pellet grill in my life as I have the last 8 months. And and I'm finding that those learning all of that is really been rewarding. I am giving up on a lot of other foods, but I've really enjoyed diving into, being a better meat chef than I've ever been, and experimenting with. What?
Do you ever confit anything?
No.
You should try that. I do it mostly with bird legs, but you can do it with if you've got just a hunk of moose meat. Confit is nothing more than slowly cooking meat in fat. And it was done way back in the day as a means for preservation. So they'd cook the meat, usually ducks and geese, cook it in their own fat, and then they would store it in a jar, and all the melted fat would kind of rise to cover it, rise to the top, and sort of seal out oxygen. So that's how they used to preserve meat. Today we do it because it just tastes really good. Because it's the opposite of frying. Frying is high temperature oil, dipping it in oil. Confit is very low temperature cooking, so that it's really great for really tough cuts of meat. Like just have like maybe not like cubed stew meat, but like bigger portions of, like, say if you've got like a tougher roast shoulder or the neck. Like I like to cut it into serving size portions, like 6 to 8 ounce big chunks of portions, lay it there, completely submerge it in beef fat, cover it with foil, put it in the oven, or you could do this in the crock pot on the low setting on crock pot, or like 275 in the oven for like 4 hours. And you don't want to cook it too long because you don't want the meat to totally shred apart, because then you're going to have like rillettes, basically, like a pate of fat and meat, which you can totally eat. But that way, when you take that out, it's just like really decadently coated in fat and just way juicier, super tender.
That sounds one I got to look up. Okay. One more question. When it comes to broth and stew, like a bone broth, what's do you have like a way you like to do that? Do you do that very often?
I always make bone broth with everything. Red meat, I like it to be dark. Well, actually, with both red and white meats like pheasants or turkeys, I always do the same thing, starting it off by roasting it in the oven, and that's what's going to give you the Maillard reaction, the browning flavors. That's that caramelized color and flavor, the thing that makes you drool. You want that in your bone broth. So I always roast the bones. You can roast vegetables too. I think you can go overboard with red meat. I'll coat it with tomato paste for some umami flavor. With pheasant and turkey, I found that I don't like it in there as much. And then, throw it in your pot with your aromatics, your carrots, onion, celery, a handful of your favorite herbs. Some people put apple cider vinegar to draw out.
Do you do that?
No. I've done a little bit of research on it, and I have found a lot of conflicting information. And if you want to do it because it might be beneficial, that's great. But I don't think apple cider vinegar is the best vinegar. It's the acidity that works the magic. It's not necessarily that it comes from apples. And so I think the flavor combination for me is off-putting. But if we're going to do it, like, honestly, I would just do a splash of wine, or like, you can add acidity in other ways besides apple cider vinegar. I just think somebody who's real crunchy decided to use apple cider vinegar because it's the healthiest vinegar.
Yeah.
Air quote. And then everybody puts it in their bone broth. But anyway, I found conflicting information. But if you want to do it because you think the placebo effect, whatever, but I don't think it has to come from an apple. It could be white wine vinegar. It could be red wine vinegar. It doesn't need to be.
So do you use like a crock pot or an Instapot, or does it matter?
It doesn't matter. When we used to hunt so many birds, a lot of waterfowl. If I'd have just like, we'd go hunting and I have like one goose. Well, the whole goose fits in the crock pot. I'll do my bone broth in the crock pot that way. But if I've got venison, I've got a lot of bones that's not going to fit. And so I have like one massive pot, and because it makes such a big batch, I end up pressure canning it so that it's shelf stable. And a lot of times, the best thing you can do to add to that is all the silver skin and tissue. I mean, I can't remember what kind of billion-dollar industry collagen is, but I spend money on collagen. Like I put collagen powder in my coffee every morning. And I mean, venison, wild game is loaded with it because the more an animal works and moves its body, the more its joints and ligaments are being developed and strengthening, and you're getting more collagen out of that. And that is what makes a good bone broth gelatinous and so nutritious. And so, like, save all of it, all of it.
So, Danielle, what do you think about like some of the store-bought bone broths? How do they compare, do you think, to nutritionally to like your own homemade stuff? Because there's a lot of it out there now.
Yeah, I don't know so much. I mean, you got to read. I end up having to buy a lot of store-bought bone broth because mine only goes so far. Because I like to cook it like I'll cook. I eat a lot of quinoa. That's really the only grain that I eat a lot of. And I always put bone broth in it when cooking. But the first thing I do is look at the ingredients. Is it coming from concentrated, and is it water added back to it? Like, how is it made? Or is it really actual bone broth being pressure canned? The biggest indicator of the quality is the amount of protein per ounce or proportion size. Mm-hmm. The lower the protein, the more watered down it's going to be. It's easy as that, and less flavorful it's going to be.
Okay.
So just looking at the amount of protein is going to be your biggest indicator on how good it's going to be.
Well, I got to say thank you for sharing all of your information. I appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Yeah. The book comes out on October
8th.
October 8th.
You can get that on wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, the Meateater website.
Yep. It's called Wild and Whole Seasonal Recipes for the Conscious Cook.
Yep. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was a really delightful conversation. I feel like I talk so much about how to cook game that I don't really get to talk so much about like the nutrition side of things. And that's always kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on. You answered a lot of my personal questions, which is kind of this reason I like to do the podcast, for selfish reasons. And then if the audience gets something out of it, that's great. So
yeah, cool. Awesome.
All right, Danielle.
Much.
Thank you. Have a great one.
Thanks.